Hey, good happy Sunday morning to everyone. Okay, let me get situated here and we'll get things rolling. All right. Okay. So today, the last day of March. I can't believe spring is coming up really quick. I'm really excited about that. Chris, first one to comment. Hey, how you doing? Flaming Groove. Good day to you. I'm getting a few people rolling in the inside here. Okay, let's see here. Yvonne, hello in Norway. Let's see, it's in the evening for you there. Glad you could come and hang out. Tomorrow's the first is tomorrow April 1st, or do we have 31 days? I don't know. Anyway, so today I've got a really special guest. I'm really excited to have him on. I credit him with actually influencing some of my taste along the way. He just I think he had his 9-year anniversary on YouTube this last week. So he's been making videos for a long time. He's very well respected, has a lot of subs, and he's very knowledgeable on all all genres, especially classical, and he's a kind of a gearhead, does a lot of gear reviews and stuff like that. So we're going to kind of get into it. Hey, Rachel, glad you're here. A little bit, and I thought I would. So I think it was 8 years ago. He made a video on getting into classical music, and I found it last year sometime, and have watched it I think 2 or 3 times, and it kind of spurred my affection for living stereo and Mercury Living Presence, and mostly out. I haven't been able to find a whole lot of the classical ones because they're a little bit harder to find, but even the popular music in the living stereo. So I think I probably have about 30 living stereos, and they've been real favorites of mine. I love to get them in when they're in really good shape. I never pick them up for when they're in rough shape, but when they're in really good shape, they just sound fantastic. And I they always have great covers, and there's just something, the aesthetic of them is just really, I don't know, I just find them really cool, and the sound is always really good. Here's a Della Reese that I recently picked up, which is fun. One of my favorite classical ones is this Rachmaninoff, Van Cliburn, the Shaded Dog, and his video goes into the labels as well, and not just Mercury and RCA, but Decca and London and Deutsche Grammophon and stuff like that. So it's very informative, and I would suggest going back in his catalog. This is probably my favorite pop release of, if it's called pop, I guess we can ask him about that. This Frankie Carl. I'm a piano guy. I love it, and this was one of the first ones I got, and really fell in love with this issue, or with this release. And then of course Mercury Living Presence, which are a little bit harder for me to find. I'm sure he knows about this one, and I've talked with him a little bit in other streams about this one here. This is Ernst Bloch, who actually got stranded on the Oregon coast way back in the day and ended up living on the Oregon coast for quite a while. This is an interesting record, non-conventional, I guess maybe he would say, but cool nonetheless. And then one that I really, really like is this one, and this was a radio copy, and you can see it's crossed out here, and it's been on the back. It says it's been deleted, and in this track there's like a 3 rotation click, so they couldn't play it on the radio. And but the album is absolutely fantastic. And of course, I'm talking about Michael from Poetry on Plastic. Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Hey, Marty. It's good to see you.
Oh, good to see you too. I'm so excited about our little chat here and see what we can talk about. Cover a lot of different subjects. So, you're back home now? Were you traveling this week?
Yeah, I was on tour assisting another band in the Air Force for the last 2 weeks. So I was actually playing concerts in upstate New York while I was in Virginia.
Okay.
Then I was playing concerts in upstate New York, and Now I'm back for about a week, and then I go on tour with
Okay.
my band, the Air Force Academy Band, and we're going on a tour of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine.
Do you like New England?
You know, I've never been to New England. I used to live in New York City, but I don't think I ever made it north of New York. I've
Okay.
never been to Massachusetts or any of that area.
Should
So
be
it's going to
pretty
be
in the
exciting.
spring. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
So
we're going to
you,
Portland, Maine, and I hear that's really beautiful.
oh, neat. Our counterpart on the East Coast from Oregon here. Yeah. Do you moonlight with other bands often?
Well, so I mean, for those that don't know, I play in the Air Force Band and one of
Yeah.
the Air Force bands, and we have in the Air Force bands what's called manning assists, where if another band needs personnel, they will ask the other bands in the Air Force to provide personnel, and if my schedule allows, I go assist them. So it's not really like I'm not gigging for them; it's part of my job, but it's just it's called what they call in the military is called TDY, temporary duty, temporary duty.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you get permission to do that?
Yes, it's all run through my chain. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So I wanted to ask you, you're living in Colorado Springs now, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in East Lansing, Michigan, and that's where I
Okay.
spent my childhood, right outside Michigan State University, kind of a little college town outside a kind of decaying industrial city, which is Lansing, Michigan, which is where they would make like the steering racks and a lot of the stuff for GM cars.
Okay.
Um, and then when I was 14, my family moved to Austin, Texas, so I spent most of my high school in Austin, Texas.
Oh, cool town.
Yeah, it was really exciting for me because it was the first time I got to live in a music town, and music was
Yeah,
really important to me
big
growing
music
up.
town. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Did you have a musical family, or how did you get your appreciation for music?
No, I did not have a musical family. I did not grow up in a musical family,
Okay.
but I did grow up in a family that stressed the importance of extracurriculars.
Ah,
So
okay.
it was always, soccer, tennis, music, after school music. But before my public schools offered music, I was being enrolled in like after school music, whether it be like little classes teaching you to play like little percussion instruments, or I think I did 1 year of early morning strings. And it took a while for me to find things that really clicked with me, but it was always something I really enjoyed and had a passion for. I think part of it was because it was this kind of other world that was so exciting to me. That's not something I grew up in.
So when did were you when did the were you into just top 40 music when you were young or whatever? When did the classical element of music come into your life?
Um, I had a couple cassettes growing up. Um, and it's really weird thinking back to the cassettes I would listen to a lot, because one of them was a Petula Clark's Greatest Hits cassette.
Oh wow.
And I don't know if that's a little out of left field, but I remember really enjoying that. I had a Mozart Magic Flute cassette, and it was Magic Flute for Children, and it was like a children's retelling of his opera, The Magic Flute. And I found that really fascinating because it was fantasy. It was almost like a kid discovering Lord of the Rings, because it had dragons and a evil queen and princess, and it was this whole fantastical tale told through music. And even though it was kind of a dumbed down version for kids, I remember I played that cassette a lot because I
Mhm.
loved the story, I loved the music, the melodies really stuck with me. So that was kind of my first introduction to classical music, I think. And then I think occasionally growing up as a kid, I'd go to some concerts, maybe not classical concerts, but like pops or like community concerts or things like that.
Okay. Did you in high school? Did you start? When did you start actually playing an instrument or taking lessons?
I took a few piano lessons when I was in elementary school, I think. Never really stuck. Piano didn't wasn't a good fit for me.
That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah.
I then started learning guitar, and I liked playing guitar. I didn't like learning the I think I had a teacher that kind of let me get away with it. I didn't like learning the actual fundamentals of guitar, like reading music, or
Mhm.
like learning to actually play beyond just like chords to your basic chords.
Yeah.
And so I never really progressed that much in guitar. I played guitar in a couple bands in like middle school. Um, and I don't think I ended up doing it in high school. Maybe in ninth grade, I think I jammed a few times. Because I was also getting into discovering like rock music back then. Because I think back to what it was like discovering music when I was a kid. And I mean, I think I was really one of the last generations to have to do it the hard way.
What do you mean
I
by
think
that?
I think about kids that grew up after me, and I think because I when I was discovering my musical taste, YouTube did not exist.
Right.
There was no internet streaming music. It was pretty much all by CDs. And I mean, I think I could go on like Yahoo.com had like a few music videos for like major artists up. And there were message boards, but I was really too young to kind of get into the message boards. So it was really either word of mouth or just looking at CDs in like, growing up in the suburbs in Michigan, going to Best Buy and looking at CDs. We had a rock radio station when I was growing up in East Lansing or Lansing, called it was a new, like they had a regular rock radio station which played a lot of what I at the time we called dad rock or butt rock. So like, I mean, Nirvana is great. I love Nirvana, but it was playing a lot of Nirvana, Queens of the Stone Age, Metallica, that kind of stuff that was not new. It wasn't my generation's music. But there was a radio station that was playing new or hard rock, called 92.1 The Edge. And they were playing stuff like Incubus and Linkin Park and just or the punk green. They're playing Green Day. They're playing stuff like that. And that's kind of where I discovered a lot of this music. I think the first rock CD I ever owned was actually this album here, which was Incubus's Morning View.
Okay.
Which is such a good album. I mean, I got really lucky. And what it was is I won a contest with the local radio station where if you were like a certain caller, you show up and get a free CDs. And this was, I think, the CD I got. And I think I still have that copy of that CD somewhere. It's like the jewel case is broken on it. But
Cool.
this was really, I mean, I think I got this record when I was in 6th grade. And I feel like this is a pretty good record to stumble on when you're in 6th grade.
Okay. Right on.
So I transitioned to like rock and heavier music really quickly.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cool world to discover. It was hard. It wasn't easily accessible. Basically, I mean, people joke about, there's a lot of like, especially people from my generation, we joke about the influence of like Hot Topic, that store, on alternative music subcultures. But think about it. Circa 2003, 2004, there wasn't a lot of places you could go to learn about new bands or learn about new music. Yeah. And I could go in there and they had a whole CD wall and it was all this like really interesting, heavy, aggressive, or just cutting edge young music that I don't think I would have ever discovered besides that. I mean, that's why I discovered so many like early punk bands that I started listening to. I know that's kind of corny, but
no, that's right. We didn't have the option of just getting on unless you're, what's that streaming?
I think Napster was starting to make sure. I didn't know how to use that stuff.
Yeah, neither did I. I didn't know about any, sharing all that stuff. So were you taking a flyer on some CDs, something that looked cool and then just getting it and discovering it, or mostly on the radio or friends?
A little bit on the radio. There wasn't a lot of, I mean, there were a few people that were into alternative music when I was growing up. I think by the time I was starting to get older, the rock music boom had kind of died. And pop music was really what was kind of taken over. Like, especially, I remember by the time I hit middle school, especially by the time I hit high school, rock music, just people didn't listen to rock music much anymore. There were little cliques of people that were interested in it, but I mean, as far as like the stuff that was cool in high school, I think the days of guitar music was done. No, I would go to the CD listening racks because back then Hot Topic sold CDs and they had CD listening racks, and I might do that at other stores too. But they would have like the interesting new releases that came out that month
that you could listen
on a
to
CD rack, and you could listen to the CDs. And I discovered, I mean, that's how I discovered one of my favorite, people joke, but I discovered one of my favorite all-time albums on a Hot Topics listening rack. And that was this album. I don't know if you ever heard of this group.
What is it?
The Sound of Animals Fighting, Tiger and the Duke. This is like if Warped Tour kids made a King Crimson album.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to write that down. What's the name of the band again?
The Sound of Animals Fighting. It's a super group between a couple different kind of like bands that were on the scene at that time. It had members from, at that time, Seosin, but later Circa Survive.
Okay.
It had members from RX Bandits, from the band Finch, which was a band I was into at the time. It had members from Good Old War. Keith Goodwin was in this band,
Oh, yeah.
which at that time was Days Away. I don't know if you've heard of Days Away.
But I know Good Old War. I was into them
Yeah.
in the early 2000s. Yeah. Love those guys.
So very interesting album, and it was kind of a niche album, and but it just happened to be the one that flipped the switch for me, because it was heavy and abrasive, but also melodic, and it also had progressive elements, because I've always liked kind of overly complicated noodly music.
Mm-hmm.
Like eventually in high school, I got into like Dream Theater and Between the Buried and Me and King Crimson and all that stuff. And then I was listening to it. Part of that was going hand in hand with some of the classical music I was into. I was into very heavy orchestral music. I thought it was really fascinating. It was like either emotional or dramatic, or sometimes like the music, like I'm writing a review right now of a box set of Ravel's orchestral music, the composer Maurice Ravel. And I think I used the phrase in that review. It's like his music is almost like watching the inner workings of a mechanical watch. Everything fits so finely together, and it creates this whole that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So it might be weird for people for me to make that connection, or to say that I like all this like rock and metal and all that stuff, and then I also like classical music. And I just, there is a cultural difference, I think, but musically, that difference doesn't exist to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a cultural context difference, but the music doesn't seem that different to me.
Okay. That's cool. So you're in high school in Austin, is that right?
Yeah. I was going to high school in Austin.
Did you go to uni then for music?
Yeah, I went to university for music first. I became serious. I think I always wanted the idea of doing music as my career goal. It was like this romanticized thing to me pretty much in high school onwards. But it wasn't really until we moved to Texas that I think it became a possibility, because I moved from, I don't know if people know really about what public school music education is like in this country, but Texas is pretty much hands above the rest of the country.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that's actually a side effect of the football programs there, because the band supports the football program.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's true. Football is so huge and they have all these marching bands, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
It is one of the best side effects in
big competition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I went from a high school, and I started playing oboe in 6th grade. That's my instrument.
Okay.
And it was good. It was fascinating. I enjoyed music. I didn't practice as much as I should have. I took private lessons, which is a lot of people in public school music in most places in the country don't take private lessons. They just go to band rehearsal and go home, and maybe they play the oboe a little, or they play their instrument a little bit at home. I did take weekly lessons, which was a luxury that I had. But then I went to Texas, and I went from having my high school in East Lansing had they had 2 bands, 2 wind ensembles, and I was the only oboist in the high school. And I went to Texas, where my high school had 4 wind ensembles, 4 bands, and 12 oboists at the high school. And that it had a private lesson program. Teachers would come into the school and teach the students during the school day.
Oh, wow.
With subsidized, it wasn't free, but it was like subsidized. I didn't study there. I had a lot of people would take privately outside that. And that was like, oh, wow, there's like competition, and there's people that are good at this. And that was the first time I'd ever encountered that. And then I was lucky enough, the summer before my senior year, I went to this kind of somewhat well-known arts camp in Michigan called Interlochen Arts Camp. It used to be called the National Music Camp. It's kind of like, was one of like the places to go in high school for the summer if you were serious about pursuing classical music as a career.
Did they have scouts?
No, I mean they had a recruiting program, but it's a relatively prestigious program that's been around for a long time, basically since World War II.
Okay.
And there's you held up that Van Cliburn record. Van Cliburn used to be a frequent guest artist there.
Oh, really?
Like
okay.
it had that kind of rich history, and I was so excited to go. And I got there, and I was the worst oboist there. I was
Interesting.
terrible.
Is
And
this
I
in
was
Texas as well?
no Interlochen Arts Camp is in northern Michigan. It's
Okay.
near Traverse City area.
Okay. And how long is a couple weeks kind of a thing or?
It was 7 weeks, 8 weeks,
Oh my goodness. So you're there
the
for
whole
7
summer,
or 8 weeks, the whole
the whole
summer.
summer,
Interesting.
and maybe it was 6 weeks. I don't remember. And it was like that was the wake up call for me. It was like, if I want to do this, I gotta work. I gotta work
Yeah.
because everyone there was better than me, and everyone there.
How old were you when you were at that camp?
I was 16.
Okay, so like
Yeah,
a sophomore or a junior, something like that.
yeah. It was the summer before my senior year. I turned 17 at I think that summer,
Okay.
and that was then I really started like really working and practicing. My senior year, I took a lot of college auditions. I ended up actually going to Ithaca College in upstate New York
Oh,
for
I think
my
that's is
undergrad.
that where Rick Beato went?
I think so. Yeah, I think so
Yeah.
actually.
He just
And
posted a video this week about his audition. I didn't know about the auditioning process for colleges.
yeah,
And
I mean, you go travel on your own dime.
yeah.
And really, when you're auditioning for music programs, when you're interested in doing music performance, that is a process where it's less like you really the instrumental teacher is the one that has ultimate say whether you get into the school. So you're really going to audition for either the teacher, or if it's a studio that has multiple teachers, for the faculty there. You're really supposed to take a lesson before you audition so they can get to know you and feel what it's like to work with you. And so my senior year, I was traveling all around taking auditions for music schools. I ended up going to Ithaca because I really liked the teacher there. And the program seemed quite serious. In hindsight, it wasn't a good fit for me because at that point I was young and I really wanted to be in a worldly bigger city. And I ended
Mm.
up putting myself in Ithaca, New York, which is a somewhat small town, kind of in the middle of upstate New York. And I learned that, I mean, Ithaca has great programs, but it really is not, it wasn't the type of school to prepare me to be a competitive orchestral player winning auditions. It was putting out a lot of music educators, a lot of people in music technology. It was basically one of the best places to go if you wanted to be a top flight band director.
Yeah,
It
Rick
wasn't,
Beato talks about the taking musical teaching, like the
yeah,
musical ed, basically, so you could become a teacher instead of somebody in an orchestra there. Yeah.
yeah. It
So
was a big ed
Ithaca was good
school,
for that. Okay.
and I realized, I mean, one of the things that the advice I'd give to anyone interested in pursuing music in a competitive, career oriented way is you have to be around the people that are succeeding at doing what you want to do.
Mm.
And I wasn't finding that a lot of Ithaca. So I want, after about a year, I wanted to leave, and I took auditions for a couple more that were more conservatory oriented. And I ended up going to the Manhattan School of Music. I transferred there, and because that was a place I knew where I would be around people that were a lot better than me, B, that were winning the jobs that I wanted to win.
Mm.
I wanted to be that small fish in the big pond. And so I went there, and it was amazing. It was transformative. I worked my butt off. I went in a decent but struggling player, and I came out, I think, a much more confident, hardworking, structured musician. A
So
lot of
in
that I
that
credit to.
school, is it all music all the time, or are there other prereq classes and stuff that are not music related, or is it like just music history and this kind of stuff? Describe your syllabus a little bit.
It's almost entirely music oriented. I took theory courses. I didn't have to take music history because I didn't have to take music history, the base classes, because those credits transferred from from Ithaca. But I took, yeah, music theory, oral skills, which is sight singing, which is the ability to sight read music and sight sing music and use solfege and things like that. And
Can you tell us what solfege is?
like the assigning of figures to pitches. So if we have like a C major scale, we would sing it like do re mi fa sol la ti do. Or if identifying minor, do, re, mi, fa,
Mm,
sol, la, ti, do. The ability to basically map out the harmonic relationships
okay,
in a melody or in something and be able to uh, get that out verbally. Basically, you don't have to be an amazing singer to do sight singing. It's more
sure.
about recognizing pitch relations, which
Okay.
does teach you to be a better musician no matter what instrument you play.
Yeah.
It's pain in the butt though.
Do you find that it really has a lot to do with tuning your ear to listening
Yeah,
to those? Yeah.
intervals to be
Yeah.
able to say, okay, this is a sixth. This is a major sixth. What does that sound like?
Yeah, I recently took a couple or did a couple online classes with Open Jazz where they were talking about identifying the fourth, fifth, sixth, just listening to
Yeah,
it. And it was fascinating when you hear that and you're in your mind, I'm like da 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 da. Oh, that's a fifth, and
yeah.
then being able to you do it over and over again, and your mind just catches it after a while. It's very gratifying once you kind of get the hang of it a little bit. Yeah, that's cool. So, you were in New York City at that point, right?
Yeah, I spent 3 years in New York City doing my undergrad there. I studied with Robert Botti, who is still this longtime second oboe of the New York Philharmonic. That was an amazing experience. I got to go see the New York Phil basically for free quite a bit. I got in the Met Opera. I almost saw the Met Opera more than I saw the Phil because I thought the Met Opera Orchestra was amazing, and it. There's a lot of cities that have great orchestras. I went to Montreal that had an amazing orchestra. I think Colorado Symphony here in Denver is or up in Denver is a great orchestra. There's not a lot of companies that have world class opera companies,
Hmm.
and New York has a world class opera company,
And
and
are
I
those
went.
singers, are they staffed or do they buy the opera there? Like you have regulars that are employed in that particular
They have
venue?
regulars that make up a chorus,
Okay.
the Met Opera chorus, but then for the soloists, for the specific roles, they will recruit the people they need from around the world. I mean, you had people singing at the Met that were Americans, that were German, French, Russian, coming from all over. Because the Met is definitely the premier opera company in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Were you an opera fan or did you
yeah.
become an opera fan while you were there? What brought you kind of into that?
I was always an opera fan. Because it's kind of this like total, it builds it so many things. It's like in some ways it's almost like watching a movie. There's plot and there's story, but there's this high level orchestral synthesis that complements it. It's like what I learned about in undergrad, like Wagner's concept of total art. Like opera is almost in a way total art. It's the
Mm,
visual, it's the written, it's the yeah, I mean, it's the textual certainly, but it's also the musical, and it's very very thrilling, especially to see an opera company like the Met. So I got $20 student tickets to go see the Met pretty much anytime I had free time, and I was also going to see, like I was living in New York, so I was going to see like every touring punk metal rock act that I
yeah.
possibly could. I mean, I think there was one night where I went and saw, and it was stupid because I was so tired by the end of the night. But I went and saw. They were doing my first and second year in New York. They were doing the Wagner Ring Cycle, which is kind of a momentous thing whenever an opera company gets around to doing that because it's a lot of money. It's a big production. And I went and saw Götterdämmerung, which is the final opera in in that cycle. And then I immediately hoofed it on the L train to go to Bushwick to see. I don't know if you know the band Future of the Left,
I don't.
like a British post-hardcore band, to see
Okay.
Future of the Left and This Town Needs Guns play at like a bar at the Knitting Factory in Brooklyn, um, where the guitarist spat beer on me. Uh,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Tell us a little
Uh,
bit about life in New York when you're a young, you're 18, 19, 20 years old. Is it surreal at first, or do you get your sea legs after a while? And what does it mean to you now?
uh, I think when you're that age, I mean, I lived in New York from age 20 to 22,
Okay.
and
Perfect time.
Yeah, kind of perfect time. And especially when you're that age, nothing tires you out.
Right. Yeah.
The city doesn't feel overwhelming because nothing is overwhelming at that age. You don't know what you're doing, but uh, it doesn't really matter. And you live lighter, you have less stuff. It kind of works. I don't think I'd want to live there now, because
Yeah.
then for my graduate degree, I ended up going to McGill in Montreal, which
Oh,
in
wow.
many ways is a city that has pretty much most of the things that New York City has. It's just as old. It's beautiful. The public transit. You don't have to have a car. Has
More
all
of a
this
European
historic
feel, right?
arts. Yeah, people say that. I would
I hear
say
that. I've never been, but
it has more of a European feel because the city is laid out like a functioning city where you can walk to places, and it has, there's apartments over shops, and then right next to it
mm,
are townhomes, and it's not zoned to death the
okay.
way a lot of North American cities are. Uh, so in that regard, it has a more European feel, but it's still a North American city. But
If
it's
you would had to live in one of the two cities now, what would you choose?
Montreal, hands down.
Really?
It's a more livable city. The people are nicer. It's cheaper, and it has all the things. It has pretty much all the things New York has. It's just less dirty, and people are less mean, and
Interesting.
you won't go broke trying to get
Yeah,
a apartment there.
right on. Okay, so you jumped from New York to Montreal. How long were you in Montreal?
2 years.
2 years. Then so you're is that a postgraduate? Is that what you would call
That was
that?
my master's degree.
Master's degree. Okay. So you're wrapping up that. Did you know you wanted to go into the Air Force at that time, or what was your transition from there?
No, I mean I started really taking professional auditions at that time. I think that for musicians, it's not really about, oh, I want to play in the military, or I want to play in this type of orchestra, or there's just job postings, and you take the job postings because
Oh,
because
okay.
you want to play your instrument for a living.
Yeah.
Um, I think the first audition I took was for the Buffalo Philharmonic, and I played like ass because it was my first audition, and I was really nervous.
Yeah.
Um, and I took other auditions around that time. And then I did my master's in Montreal. I studied with the amazing Ted Baskin, who is just retired a year and a half ago as principal oboe of the Montreal Symphony after 43 years.
Oh, wow.
He had that job for 43 years.
Wow.
So he played on. I wish I had the record. I have records from the 80s that he played on.
Yeah.
If you watch the video I did with Mark Ward on the tracking angle, I show some of those records, and that was great. And also, at that time, it was dirt cheap to go to Canada and do a degree like that, especially graduate degree, because already McGill was kind of a deal compared to American schools at the time, and then I had a scholarship, so I did my entire master's degree for like $4,000.
Oh, wow. That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, and compared to some of the other schools I was looking at in the States, like I mean, SMU in Dallas had an amazing music program that I was really
Is
looking
that
at. But like,
Southern Methodist? Is that what
yeah, they have
okay.
a very serious music program and an oboe player there I really
Oh,
like.
really?
But
I wouldn't
man,
have
but
guessed.
like this is like $50,000 a year. It's like
Yeah.
so that worked out, and then I ended up getting an offer to do a DMA at Arizona State University in Phoenix. So
What's a
after
DMA?
a DMA is a Doctor of Musical Arts,
Oh, okay.
and it's similar to a PhD. The difference is PhDs you can only get in certain things, especially in music, because it's a philosophy degree.
Ah,
So when you have a Doctor of Musical Arts, it is a practical performance degree. I mean, there's a research component, but you're not getting a degree in a philosophy in music. You can get a PhD in music theory. You
okay.
can get a PhD in ethnomusicology, but you can't really get a PhD in oboe.
Okay. But you
So
can get a doctorate in oboe.
yes, you can get a doctorate, and people get that is people do doctorates because they're usually cheap, free, or a net positive. I was a teaching assistant, so I actually made a little money. I mean, not much, but it wasn't costing me to go to school.
So you went
And
from now this was at Arizona?
Yeah, Arizona State, which is in
Oh, okay,
Phoenix.
in Tempe there. Yeah,
Yes.
I love that. I love
Yeah, I
that
went
area.
from the coldest city in North America to
Yeah,
the
to the
hottest city in North
warmest,
America.
indeed. What did you think of the desert? Do you like it?
It's pretty out there. It was definitely a little bit of a culture shock coming back
For
from living in
sure.
Montreal to Phoenix, which is very much designed as kind of a Western U.S. suburban city.
It's a grid is what it is.
Yeah,
It's all rights, and it's all north and south roads with Grand Avenue going diagonally, and that's about it. Yeah,
yeah.
I've spent a lot of winters down in Arizona, and I like it a lot. But it's great in the winter. In the summer, it's a different story. Okay, so how was that another 2 years?
The DMAs kind of take as long, doctorates kind of take as long as they need to. I
Okay,
had 3 years of coursework, 3 years of like classes, and then it's however long it takes you to finish your dissertation.
okay,
So I moved there. I was still taking auditions. I was starting to do better at auditions. I was making it into finals for more things because the way these professional auditions work is it's even more brutal than college auditions. Basically, an orchestra will post a listing and they'll say we have a spot available for an oboist. It's like let's say it was the first one I took was Buffalo. So let's say Buffalo had an opening for second oboe, and you send your resume, and they invite you based on your resume. Usually, if you have music degrees or relevant education, they'll invite you to come audition. You pay for your own plane ticket, you pay for your own hotel. You go to the audition, and you play what's called a prelim round, where you walk out. They have a list of music you learn for the audition. They give it to you about a month in advance, and you practice
hmm
it for a month. And it's orchestral excerpts, so it's like solos from Tchaikovsky or Ravel or pieces that you would be expected to play in the orchestra.
specifically
Usually,
designed for your instrument
yes,
or
and
the
it's
instrument.
well known stuff. That usually the audition list, there's variation, but a lot of the stuff that's on the audition list is more or less universal. Like on almost every professional audition I've ever played, I played the first 2 pages of the Mozart Concerto,
Okay,
just because that's what you start with when you go play an
yeah,
audition. And then, Ravel's La Tombe de Couperin, which you had that record up, that's a standard that you play on almost every audition.
okay.
Rossini's La Scala di Seta overture is on almost every audition. Strauss Don Juan, the oboe solo from that, that shows up on almost every audition. So there's a few excerpts like that. And you go out and you're in prelim groups. You're candidate number 5. You go out and they give you a list when you get to the audition of, okay, from this bigger list, these are the 4 excerpts we're going to hear in this round. You go out, you don't say anything because the panel is behind a screen, and the proctor goes, this is candidate 5, and you sit down and you play through your list, and they say thank you, and you go back into your room, and you'll be in a prelim group of maybe 8 people, and they might advance 1 or 2 of them to the next round, the semifinals.
Wow.
And that can go either an entire day or 2 days. And by the end of it, they hire someone.
So you're not going home and waiting for a couple weeks or whatever.
No,
You would find out.
no, not for orchestra auditions. So I was going out and doing that. I got pretty close. I was in finals for a couple. I was in finals. The job that I still is like, got away from me was, I was in finals for second oboe for Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. That was probably the first time it was like, wow, I could actually have a job doing this.
So a chamber orchestra is smaller than a normal
Yeah,
size.
yeah.
Is that right? How
Some
many?
some big cities have chamber orchestras. Usually
Okay.
they're sized more for like classical era works, so they might not have a full brass section. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
And are they generally staffed by people who are in the full orchestra as well, or
No,
would it
it's a separate
be
organization,
separate?
separate job.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I think I don't know if Philadelphia still has a chamber orchestra. LA is one of the few like well-known chamber orchestras.
Okay.
Like they record and they it's a full-time gig, it's salaried. Um, so I was doing that. Um, about halfway through my degree, I won a job playing English horn in the Tucson Symphony,
English
and that
horn.
was,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. Well, I was third oboe English horn,
Okay.
so I'd play whatever depending on the needs. And that was a good job to have for that degree, because what was happening is I was basically, when they needed me, I was driving down from Phoenix to play in Tucson.
Okay.
Um,
I
and
love
I
Tucson.
would, yeah, Tucson's a cool city. It's
Yeah, it is.
smaller, but it has a little more character than Phoenix. Phoenix
A
is
lot
not a
more
bad city.
character than Phoenix. Yeah, yeah, the culture, from my opinion anyway,
Yeah, it's
in
very like
Tucson is,
Arizona culture.
yeah,
Phoenix just feels like it could be any city. It's not bad.
yeah,
And Phoenix does have nice, because like the nice thing about Phoenix is it had, all the stuff that any big city would have. It has uh interesting shopping. It has concerts. People that tour around the world come to Phoenix. Like I saw the Rolling Stones in Phoenix
hmm,
when their drummer that passed away, I can't remember his name, Charlie Watts, but
yeah,
when Charlie Watts was still playing with them. That
mm,
was cool. I don't think that, that's not the kind of thing you can do in Tucson, but
yeah. Um, Tucson is like, it'd be more like the size of Portland, Oregon that we have here. A little bit more intimate, a little bit more character of its own. And you're right there, tucked kind of in the mountains a little bit too, which is cool. I like
yeah.
Tucson. And funny enough, it's south of Phoenix, but it's a little bit more moderate temperature.
Yeah, it's about usually about 10 degrees cooler.
Yeah, which is really cool. I have some really close friends down there. I love to visit. So, what was the next step after graduation from Arizona
Well,
State?
COVID happened, and luckily that happened in the last year of my coursework, so there wasn't really much left to do. I didn't have to subject myself, as I only had like 2 months where I had to subject myself to the whole online learning thing. It
Hmm.
was the rest of the time was I was doing online stuff with the Tucson Symphony, because we were trying to keep the orchestra going during COVID, and mostly just and then trying to finish my thesis, basically, which took a little bit of time, especially once the orchestra picked back up again, because it was like, you get in that cycle where you're putting out the most immediate fires first,
Yeah.
and so it was like, oh, I've got this gig coming up this weekend, so I'll prepare for that, and the thesis I can do later. And
What was your thesis on?
I ended up doing, I especially starting in my master's degree, I became more interested in earlier music, so music of the 17th and 18th century.
Okay.
And I started doing a thesis around French Baroque music. And what I did is I discovered this family of composers called the Philidor family.
Hmm.
They were a family of court composers that were attached to the Bourbon court, the French court. Louis, they worked for Louis the 13th, Louis the 14th, Louis the 15th,
Hmm.
and there were like, I mean, it was a huge family, but like half the family was working as musicians for the court. Um, and they were wind players, they were composers. One of them was in charge of the Royal Archive of Music, and I realized that there wasn't a lot of information in English about this family of composers. And so I identified a need where it's like, okay, it would be interesting to have a document that can kind of put all the information we have
Yeah.
available that's scattered around different places, talk about the family tree of this composer family, talk about the music they were composing. I started digging around. Luckily, the French National Library in Paris has digitized a large part of their collection, a large portion of their manuscripts. And so I was hunting around the French National Archive of Music and looking at manuscripts, which is either music that was handwritten by the composer or music that was copied. So music that was not printed, published, but music that was used as parts in that era, and stuff that has never been published in a modern edition. There's because a lot of older music, like like the music of Mozart or the music of Bach, people have published modern editions that are much easier to read for the lay
Hmm.
musician today,
Oh, okay.
that are not going off the manuscript of Bach's time. It was stuff in different clefs, or the notation looks different. It's stuff. It's music. It's sheet music that specialists, people that are like Baroque nerds, can read off of, but that's not 90% of performing working musicians.
Hmm.
And so I found a manuscript. It was actually a presentation copy of a piece by one of the members of the Philidor family that had never been published in a modern edition. And I edited it, I revised it, and I commissioned a harpsichord realization. So I commissioned a accompaniment, because back then, this music, if it had a keyboard part with it, which was called a figured bass, it would just have the bass line. And the keyboardist was to improvise the rest, fill in the rest. And there are specialists that do that now, that still do that. But again, we're limiting the window of people that can play this music now.
Mm-hmm.
So I commissioned a realization by a really good harpsichord player to add to this music, so that anyone sitting down can approach this music. It's not this scary other thing that's like this antique artifact you have to be an anthropologist to play.
Yeah.
It's music that your average undergrad or graduate student at a music school can pick up and kind of understand and play.
How gratifying.
Yeah, so it's contributing to the repertoire, a little bit of history, and then it was kind of, I wanted to bridge the gap. I wanted to create a document that was bridging the gap a little bit between the specialists and the people that were at one time like me, that were your average performance musician that, you know, maybe was scared to approach this music because it was like, oh, this is like this special thing that these special people do. No, you can do it too.
Yeah. That's
so
cool.
that was the goal in my project. It took a couple years. I ended up graduating in the spring of 2023, finally finishing that.
So that, I mean, that I can, you know, when you spend a couple years on a project, finishing it up has got to be a real sense of accomplishment for sure.
Yeah, it's a big relief that it's done, because I know a lot of people that I have a lot of friends that are very, very smart, talented people that things happen in their life and they just never finish their doctorates.
Yeah, they got all the talent. They got all the talent, but maybe not enough determination to.
Or they work on other things, or they get jobs that they don't need the degree for. I mean, in many ways, for a musician, for an instrumentalist, a doctorate. I mean, like, to do my job right now, I don't need a doctorate.
Yeah.
I mean, I teach at the college level now, but I teach at the college level because I'm an experienced person with a performance job that gives me that experience to be able to pass it on to students. What a DMA really is for people like me is it qualifies you to teach at the university level, whether that be teaching theory classes or teaching private lessons or doing it. It's just really, it's that extra thing that looks better on a resume when they're screening resumes.
Okay, so that takes me to you in 23. You graduate. Is that when you get on with your current position now?
Yeah, excuse me. Oh, I just swallowed some ice, which is really dumb.
Oh, you're good. Don't worry about it.
I actually took the audition. So I started getting the idea of, I had other friends that won military band jobs. Mm-hmm. They're auditioned for very much the same way as an orchestra job. I think the first one I actually took was the Coast Guard band. And this was during COVID, and I had to make a pre-screen tape at home in my apartment, and I'm not the best at recording.
Oh, interesting.
Like the technology behind recording, so they didn't like my pre-screen. And I took two other auditions. I took an audition for the Air Force Band in DC, which is a premier band that's the DC Air Force Band, and then also for their other premier band, which is the job I currently have, the Air Force Academy Band here in Colorado Springs. That's attached to the Air Force Academy. And that was one of the, you know, I had a feeling when I came out of it that, oh, that was one of the better auditions I played. I wonder if I get this. And they actually, the way the military bands work is they actually have a little bit more process than an orchestral audition, because you also do an interview too. Once they narrow you down to like the 3 candidates they want, they also interview you. And then you have to, if they select you, then you have to go through the whole process of actually enlisting in the military. It's not as easy as just signing a contract. Okay. So I took that audition. It took a while, and then they sent me the email, said that they wanted me. And so I had actually just moved to Los Angeles. I'd spent a couple months in Los Angeles because I was like, okay, I'm kind of over the Phoenix thing. Try to see, I was already getting some work in what we call the Freeway Philharmonic, which is all these orchestras that are basically freelance. I was already getting a little bit of work in California, and so I was doing the Arizona, California thing, and I figured, you know, let me try a little bit in LA. And I lived there for literally 2 months. And I got the offer to come to Colorado, and then I had to do the whole process of enlistment in the Air Force. It's a whole thing because basically, the military band jobs are interesting because you go in, they want to list, especially the premier bands, which is what I play in. They have to have a salary that is competitive to other professional musical ensembles, like if the Colorado Symphony or the Seattle Symphony or whatever, they have to be competitive to win the players that they want with those jobs. And so, but they can't make the musicians officers, because in the military, the big military is not going to let there be a unit of 62 lieutenants.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's not possible. So it was really, really going through the enlistment process. It was really, really weird. It's just a weird little niche in the military where you go in basically as a sergeant.
Okay.
You go to a recruiter that has no idea they even have a band, and you hand them a piece of paper that basically has instructions from the Pentagon that says this person is going through this weird track. And then you go through normal enlistment, like the same thing that 18-year-olds go through.
Yeah.
You go through the enlisted process. You go to MEPS, you have a doctor poke and prod you,
Physical,
you go through the whole medical process.
Yeah.
And then I went to basic training as a 31-year-old.
Isn't that interesting?
And it was very, very weird because I was in there with a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds that were doing the military to go to college. And here I was, someone with a doctorate in music. Because normally, people that don't know, normally when you have a degree, you don't enlist. You go into the office. You go into officer route.
Right.
So it very strange, but it's pretty common for the bands. Pretty much everyone in my job has a master's degree, and that's not because you need a master's degree to get the job. It's because for music, your degrees, your schooling, you're not getting the piece of paper. You're getting the training. That's what music school is. It's training. So it's yours with what you make it. So there are people that coast through music school and get the degrees and don't have any success as musicians, and they end up not being musicians because it's not about getting the degree. It's about getting the expertise and the training and the environment to be able to win the jobs.
Yeah. So the guys that you play with in the group that you're with, were they all older when they went through boot and that kind of stuff?
The youngest person in our band, we're a band of, we have 62 musicians in our ensemble. I think the youngest person in our group is 24.
Okay. How about the oldest?
Well, this is career for most people.
Okay.
So
20,
there are people that, I think the oldest people we have are in their late 40s, early 50s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see, are you, things can always change, obviously, but are you in a position where you feel comfortable and you're enjoying your job now and you see yourself doing that as a career, or you want to take another step someplace else?
Probably right now. There's always the option to audition for other ensembles. And, I do, it's a little harder with the military because I can't just quit well, I can't quit in the middle of my contract, but I can not re-enlist.
Yeah.
So I could every 4 years I have the option to get out if I want to.
Okay.
But you look at the landscape of, there's some major orchestras that are harder to get into and pay more. Because this job pays well for a music job, pays really well for a music job. But, Philadelphia Orchestra, New York Philharmonic, Cleveland Orchestra, those are like the top tier of musical ensembles.
So there's not so many steps above what you're doing right now already.
We make the same. My starting salary is the same as the Colorado Symphonies.
Okay, interesting.
And I have better benefits. I have full health care and dental and all that stuff. And those jobs don't. And these orchestras, the sad state of the American symphony orchestra is that people don't really care about classical music anymore.
Yeah.
People don't care about going to live events, period. Theaters struggling. Broadway is struggling to a lesser extent. All these things, people aren't spending their evenings out anymore.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these symphony orchestras that are these historic institutions have a lot of financial problems. And we have orchestras that have been around for a long time that all of a sudden the board says we need to cut half the orchestra, and the union says you can't do that. And then there's a lockout, and then the orchestra folds. And that happened in San Antonio. San Antonio Symphony, it no longer exists. It's the San Antonio Philharmonic, and it's a per service orchestra now. not a full-time gig anymore. Honolulu Symphony, same thing happened 10 years ago. And that had been around forever. It was the only full-time professional classical music organization in the entire state of Hawaii. And it went away. And now it's coming back is the Hawaii Symphony. It's coming back, but it's not nearly what it was. Nothing is certain in the military because it's a civilian government led organization at its heart, and things change like that. And with this administration, there's been a lot of changes that have trickled down to pretty much everyone in the military. But at the end of the day, it's still probably a more stable job than most orchestras in this country.
Is there any whispers of things in our current status of our administration, of things that might affect your group of people?
Messaging changes, because that what the military bands exist to do is primarily soft power, but also messaging. Because what happens is, especially, the military bands have existed in this country since the days of Washington. The president's own Marine band has a mandate from the president. There's a reason that exists. So these things are always old, and it's for morale and spirit and support of our military institutions. That's why they exist. But what's happened, especially as our military has changed over the last 50 years, because we've gone from a primarily drafted military where whenever there was a conflict, pretty much the entire generation, the society participated in some way. You have the World War II, Korea, Vietnam generations where everyone knew someone that was in the military or had been in the military or things like that. And to a culture now, we have a professional military where it's like less than 3% of the country has served, or is currently serving. I forget the numbers, but the number of people that know someone that have been in the military is lowest it's ever been. And so what happens is you have a society and a culture that doesn't interact with military members and doesn't interact with the military a lot. All they see is the media. That's it. And one of the reasons we exist, especially on stateside, is that we are community relations. You've never met someone in uniform. We're going to come to your town and we're going to say hi to you. We're going to talk to you about what it's like to be in the Air Force, what we do. We're going to entertain you for free. Every concert we do for the public is free. And we're going to build that face-to-face interaction with the military so that you meet someone in uniform. You know the people that are serving.
So do you have recruiters in your group of people that are talking to young people before or after concerts, or is that an aspect of your performance?
Not in our unit, but when we tour, like especially if we're playing at a high school or something, yes, there's usually we reach out and try to get recruiters there, so that if someone's interested, they have someone to talk to there. But it's not just recruitment. It's also like, there's a story, when I was actually getting in, I watched a PowerPoint presentation on this. There's a story of, I think it was in one of the Dakotas, there was this community that was super mad at their local military base because of the noise of aircraft and all these things. And there was all this local community kind of resentment of having the base there, but also because it was just this thing that was there and they didn't know the people there. They didn't have any relationship with the base, with the leadership there. And what the band was able to do was able to go into that community, have a big public concert, get to know the community, bring in the leadership from that base, and have an opportunity for the people from that community to go and get to know the people, the leadership at that base in a social environment. And what happened is the community relations between that base and that town got much better. And that made the people, the men and women that were working there, able to do their job better. So it's I know it's like, ooh, wow, we're the band, we just play patriotic music and we go, but in some ways we exist to make the job of other people in our organization easier to do.
Okay.
And it also exists. We do have a deployment side too. And not me, because I'm classical. and we don't deploy classical people unless I want to go over in a managerial role. But we deploy a rock pop jazz band
Oh, wow.
to Qatar, and what their job is their job is to go with the Department of State and make friends with people over there in the areas where we have military presence or we have partners or something like
Huh.
that. So in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, places where there's kind of this jockeying between Russian influence and U.S. influence, we have people from our unit that are part of that deployment band that will do a 6-month deployment where they're going to embassies and playing music for people, playing music for locals, playing music for local governments, to foster social interactions where they can get to know people in the American military, get to know Americans, because American culture is one of the biggest exports in the world. And
Yeah.
when you have Americans going over there and playing Ray Charles or playing Stevie Wonder or playing even like pop songs, it's like
Yeah.
that connection is probably it is in many cases a lot more powerful than a PR team going over there with a
Yeah,
PowerPoint
it's a
presentation.
universal language.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. Okay, so let's unless you have something else you want to go on, I want to find out, talk about when did vinyl come into your life?
Well, I've always had a kind of collecting itch, that itch to, especially when it comes to art. And so I had a CD collection growing up, as I'm sure a lot of people in my generation did. And and especially when I was in late high school, early college, I was going to see so much music. And it was all these bands that at that point, probably nobody had ever heard of, stuff that wasn't widely available. And so every time I go see a band and a band I hadn't heard of, and I was like, wow, this is really good. I want to buy a physical copy of this band's music. And eventually there came a time when these bands stopped selling CDs and they're selling records.
Yeah, yeah.
And I went, oh, maybe there's something to this vinyl thing. And I have one of those brains where if I'm going to get into something, I get way too into it.
So,
and it wasn't long when I was, I wanted to find a good turntable. And eventually it was like, well, no, you can't buy a Crosley. You have to buy a Project or a Riga, because this and this and this. I'm learning about the physics of what makes good sound. And then, it wasn't that long after that I was reading Analog Planet, Michael Fremer's old website, I think back then I was hanging out on Audio Karma, and there was this website called Vinyl Collective that was kind of more the younger side of that. I think eventually I found the Hoffman forums. It didn't take me long to get into the audio side of it. And it was a journey. I mean, I cut my teeth buying vintage Pioneer receivers and vintage Technics turntables. And that was my introduction to hi-fi, like vintage Yamaha speakers. At one point I had JBL 4311 monitors. I had Pioneer HPM 100 speakers. And what I realized is what made audio so interesting to me is gear wouldn't hang around long. I'd find something on Craigslist or something, and I would buy this amp or this receiver, and I go, that's cool. I've never heard a Marantz receiver before. I wonder what it sounds like. I plug it in the system, listen to it for a couple of months, and I go, ooh, but I've never heard this Pioneer receiver from this era. I want to hear what this is like, or this Sansui receiver. And that was my introduction to hi-fi.
So the gear came along right at the same time as with vinyl.
Very quickly.
Okay. How did you? I think you're an authority on the subject now. You write for publications and stuff like that. What was when did you feel like your aptitude was strong enough to be able to give people advice and to be able to comment on gear?
Well, I started my YouTube channel I think my second year at McGill. I started a YouTube channel because I'd seen a lot of people talking about records, and like there was like this burgeoning kind of vinyl community on YouTube. And I thought, I'm kind of going through this journey, and I don't really have anyone to share this with or talk with this. I mean, I had friends over, listen to records, and they go, oh, that's cool. But no one was ever into it like I was. And I mean, and that was the case a lot of times for the music I was into too. I mean, like I remember living in New York, going to shows, like I made great friends in New York, some amazing people I'm still in touch with today. No one was going to shows with me. I was going to shows by myself
Mm.
because I was into the music that I was into. And it was this solitary journey for me. And hi-fi was becoming that. And I went, what if I could talk about this with other people? What if I could share my journey and have it be a two-way conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And so I started YouTubing in like 2016. And it was sharing the records that I picked up and why I picked them up. And at that time, I was buying a lot of audiophile pressings. I was discovering like the old classic records pressings. The Music Matters jazz records were
Mm-hmm.
out in print at that era. And there was a lot of other vinyl YouTubers that were showing them. And I was like on the bandwagon for that. But I was talking about gear a little bit too, because it was interesting to me. I was showing my setups. I was doing setup tours of like, I had a little setup in my apartment in Montreal. I had a different one back at my parents' house because I was not, there's not much I could fit in the kind of apartments I was living in at that time. So I was like, let me put the good stuff back there. Cause also I was buying it in Austin. When I was home for the summers I was working service industry in the summers usually.
Okay.
And, it kind of became that. And then I realized, I was into classical music too. I was learning about the classical pressings. I was kind of rediscovering recordings from an era where even people that I was, we all listened to recordings in music school of the repertoire we were playing, but the idea of like, what was this era of recording and orchestral repertoire doing at this time, that was foreign. And discovering these old pressings, going online, reading about Mercury Living Presence, RCA Living Stereo, Decca, London Bluebacks. I was reading about that. I was finding great resources for that online. Michael Fremer was talking about that stuff on Analog Planet. And then there was, of course, I'd find PDF scans of the old issues of the magazine I now work for, The Absolute Sound.
Okay.
And Harry Pearson, I don't know if you're aware, the entire reason that there was this audiophile craze for Mercury Living Presence and RCA Living Stereo was because of the man that founded this magazine, Harry Pearson.
No kidding. Okay.
He was the one that really got the word out in the 1980s about how good these records were. Because there was a time when the average public did not have the technology, and the high-end audio was not at the place where you could really hear how good these records were in comparison to other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 80s, when high-end audio was taking off, that was the rediscovery of a lot of these recordings from the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
So I was learning about that stuff. I was reading about it. No one was talking about it on YouTube. So I wasn't the idea that I was like the first one to talk about like these old classical pressings. I wasn't. I was following people that were doing this 20 years before I was even an adult. But I think I was one of the first people to do it on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are lots of other people doing it, and great, awesome. The more the merrier. I'm glad people are talking about these records.
Yeah, I recently discovered the Pressing Matters. I forget.
Yeah, Scott, he's great.
Scott. He collects he'll collect every version of a living stereo, from the original to mobile fidelity to all the different pressings, and then compare them. The guy, something else.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I did YouTube for a few years, and I think it was around 2019 that someone who ran an online website magazine reached out to me and wanted me to come write for them. And I did that for a few years. There's a website Scott now writes for. And then I think it was not too long after that Michael Fremer at that time, Analog Planet, saw a few of my videos and I was also participating in his website. I was commenting in his website, and he recognized my username and he emailed me and asked me to come write for him. And I did that for a few years. And then just before I ended up shipping off to the Air Force, I got an offer from Tom Martin, who is now the owner of The Absolute Sound, to come do YouTube content for him and do reviews for him. And so, and then Michael Fremer, of course, transitioned from Analog Planet to Tracking Angle. And so that's kind of what I do now is I do, I stick with, I do video reviews for The Absolute Sound, and I write articles for Michael at the Tracking Angle.
Okay.
And those are the two places I think I'm the most happy, because there's a lot of different organizations out there in the audio world, and basically they're all freelance. But these are I think I found my home with these two. I
Okay.
really like working for the Absolute Sound. It's a really great team, and I get the opportunity to review and listen to a lot of amazing gear that I probably would not have at any other publication. So
Do you get sent the gear from them, or straight from the manufacturer? How does that generally work?
that I like the Absolute Sound. They run it very professionally. They do the acquisition and they hook, but then the distributor will ship directly to me. I'll
Okay.
have usually about 7 weeks ish with a piece of gear.
Okay.
And I do the video, and then they arrange the shipping to go back. I don't get anything for free. I do get, if I want to buy something, I do get industry pricing, so I pay less than the consumer does. But that's kind of why anyone does this in the first place, because it doesn't. Writing for audio magazines does not pay a lot.
No, it's
We are
labor of
basically,
love.
yeah. So this is basically a way to do my hobby in a more affordable way, and it's cool because I get to listen to a lot of different things and not have to make that financial gamble of buying something, having it, and then not liking it and try to sell
Indeed.
it.
Yeah, and when you're talking about multiple thousands of dollars for speakers or an amp or something like that, the opportunity to be able to try something out for a couple of months has got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's because there's definitely something, and most of the stuff I end up hearing is great products. It's just whether or not it's for me that's my own decision. Yeah. But because in reviewing that's something I learned from reading. It's so surreal to be working at the Absolute Sound and writing for Michael Fremer, because I learned a lot reading him. Mm-hmm. In stereo, when he was working for Stereophile and on Analog Planet, his website. And I remember reading all the people in Stereophile, more so Stereophile than the Absolute Sound, because I think the Absolute Sound is now coming back into where it kind of was. It didn't have I feel like the Absolute Sound had kind of lost its way for a bit in the transition between owners and things like that, and now it's kind of at full steam, and it's very exciting to be there. But these are people I grew up reading.
Yeah. Do you ever find that? So you've reviewed dozens of different components and speakers and whatnot, and I would have for me you have to be able to think more creatively and to define the aspects of this material differently from another one enough. Do you ever worry about, you can say something sounds great, but you have to refine that down to what great is, don't you?
I don't even know if most things sound good. It's just, so one of the things that reading really good writers, especially Michael, is that I learned my job is not to say whether a product is good or not, because good is relative.
Right.
There are products that someone may really love and the next person may hate. My job is to primarily describe what the product sounds like. That's what I feel like when I try to go into a review. That's what I feel like my mission is, because, well, first of all, when you get into high-end gear, nobody should be buying, especially once you get to a certain level. I hope that people do it, but I don't recommend it. I hope people don't go buy equipment blind based on reviews. I think the strength of reviews and the goal of reviews is to make the public aware of a product and to try to describe it to the best of your ability so that the consumer can have an idea, is this a product that the sound and the functions and the features would interest me? Because you can't hear everything. You cannot cross shop everything. If you're looking for a speaker in a certain price range, you have to decide, what kind of sound am I looking for, and what are the speakers that I think are going to be closest to that sound? And that's what reviews can tell you. If you're looking for a speaker that is super, super detailed and has this pinpoint imaging, and it's this experience where you can pick out exactly where everyone is and the soundstage is deep, my job is to identify what products are doing that, so that someone who's a consumer can go, okay, if this is what I'm looking for, these are the speakers that I'm trying to identify that are fitting that characteristic.
Can you, for us amateurs, can you describe or give us a definition of what a sound stage is?
Yeah, absolutely. So my philosophy is always that I always tell people audio is an illusion. What I am trying to do when I'm listening to music is I'm taking this artifact, this thing that was a point in time, a players performing for a studio basically, and it's the idea of bringing that to life in your living room. Not necessarily bringing the studio to life, but bringing the illusion of live music, of musicians playing in front of you, bringing that illusion to the listener. And so when I talk about what is soundstage is the idea of you can visualize where in front of you, if there is an imaginary stage in front of you, whether that's a big stage like a symphony orchestra, or whether that's the stage of a small jazz club, you can identify both in left-right width and in depth where the musicians are placed and where the sound is coming from. That is soundstage.
Okay. So, do you, when you're describing the soundstage, what would be, if you were going to describe not just the difference between like what it sounds like in a jazz club or what it sounds like, if you're describing a classical music soundstage, what are some differences just within that genre? Like how can the soundstage be different?
Yeah, because there's different equipment where in the same recording, a piece of equipment or combinations of equipment can place, like let's say it's the first violin. So if you picture a symphony orchestra and you're sitting, the first violins are sitting visually to your left in the front of the stage. Well, where does the front of the stage start? It can be different depending on the presentations of different gear, how the gear is set up in your room. You can have a very close-up perspective where the front of the soundstage, the front of the first violins is starting pretty close to you. Or maybe it's sitting a little far back. Maybe your perspective is a little farther back in the hall. And recording techniques have a big influence on that, but the equipment you listen on can portray that in a certain different way. And then it's also the distance between the musicians. Are the brass sitting back just a little bit further than the strings? Or is the depth of the stage being portrayed as deeper? Are you hearing more space around the instruments?
So describe then the difference between that and just the violins are louder or the violins are quieter. Between up front and in the back.
Because there may not be any difference in volume. It may be just a difference in how they are portrayed to your perspective. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to grasp how that would be translated to me when I'm listening to the music, and it would take a comparison, right? And the more
I've been inviting we have dedicated professional recording engineers in our unit at the band.
Oh, really?
And I love using their ears and coming sitting. Hey, listen to this gear for me, and we both take notes, and we're going to compare notes. And there were two amplifiers we were comparing a couple months back, and we were listening to the same record, and listening to two different amplifiers play the same record, and it was like, wow, everything feels more further apart on that one amplifier versus the other, whereas the other, everything is a little closer together.
What is I think another big discussion that maybe is not so relevant now, but has been, is the difference between tube gear and like solid state. Is that still a thing, or?
Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
still are people still making new? I mean, there are still new tube stuff.
Oh, obviously. It's huge. I mean, and I'm reviewing a tube preamplifier next month. Yeah, tube. I mean, my phono stage is a tube phono stage.
What are the broad strokes in the difference between solid state and tube?
Okay, broad strokes, I would broadly say that, well, first of all, with transistors, you can get a lot more power. So a lot of people will default to transistor-based power amplifiers because they're simply more efficient. You can have more power for less money versus a tube product. A lot of tube amplifiers are only, because of the designs of the tubes, are only capable of putting out, like, depending on the tubes, if you have, I mean, the most common tubes are EL34 or KT88. You have four of those in a signal path. You're only going to get around 40 watts per channel
Okay.
from those tubes. So with transistors, you can have transistor relays that are putting out much, much more power. But I would say broad stroke, there are sound characteristic differences broadly between what I would characterize as a solid state sound and a tube sound. But the thing is, those are broad strokes and they don't always apply, because I've heard tube gear that sounds more solid state and I've heard solid state that sounds more tube. It's not a hard and fast thing, but I would say broadly, when people say they're looking for tube sound, they're looking for, tubes are very, very good inherently at portraying a kind of three-dimensionality. So you can have a orchestra image where everything sounds a little bit more fully fleshed out and spread out. So tubes generally are very good at portraying this huge open sound. They're less good at super, super fast punchy things like bass, or it's hard to get tube amplifiers specifically that are really good at digging deep, deep, deep in the bass, because it requires such a level of power surge that it's sometimes difficult to design tube amplifiers that can do that. Tube amplifiers are much quicker. Solid state amplifiers, excuse me. Solid state amplifiers often can have a feeling of being quicker, more rhythmic, have a more percussive effect. There's things I like about both sounds. I like the idea of mixing and matching, so I've invested in a very powerful solid state power amplifier. And right now I'm playing with different preamplifiers, and I haven't settled on a preamplifier, but my phono preamp is a full tube phono preamplifier. Also because if you put things up in the preamplifier stage, the tubes required to run those electronics are often very much cheaper. The tubes in my phono stage I can get for like $20 a pop. The tubes in a lot of power amplifiers, depending on what tubes they're using, can be like $100 a tube.
And do they have a lifespan?
They do, and the power amplifiers burn through tubes very quickly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then of course you get into the really, if you get into the really high end stuff, you're talking one of the best sounding tubes. I think everyone agrees one of the best sounding tubes ever made is the 300B tube, and a good 300B tube is like $500.
So will manufacturers use that particular tube across many different brands?
It's all, lots of tube manufacturers will design a number of different products that are based around different tubes.
Okay. Okay. So a lot of us don't, our budget for music isn't in the multiple thousands, but let's say that somebody they've got $1,000 to spend on speakers and $1,000 to spend on amplification. Can you give maybe just a few recommendations or things that you like that are around that area?
Oh yeah, it's a great time to be getting into this hobby, because there's a lot of stuff out there. For speakers, things under $1,000, there's a lot. I would look at ELAC debut speakers. Those are designed by Andrew Jones. They're like $300 for a pair of bookshelves. They're great. They're fantastic speakers. When you're shopping in this price range, you're not going to find speakers that are going to beat out $5,000, $6,000 speakers, but the sins of stuff oftentimes now is of omission. You're not going to know what you're missing necessarily. There's nothing wrong with these speakers. But
part of it is like, I'm afraid I'm going to miss something,
Yeah, but the entry level into this, the entry level gear now has gotten so good. Really? I encourage everyone to try it out, because it's such a difference compared to regular consumer grade electronics now. Just to stepping into some $300 bookshelf speakers, you've got ELACs that are doing great stuff in the under $1,000 range. Klipsch is making a ton of their like RP series or RF series.
And they produce enough bass in a bookshelf speaker?
Depends on the size of your room, because what you don't want to do is the mistake that happens to a lot of new audiophiles is they want bass. And so they'll buy a speaker, like a tower speaker, that has enough drivers to produce bass, and they'll put it in a space where they don't have the room to make bass that sounds good. And that's how you get boomy bass. So my recommendation is start with bookshelf speakers, get a sense of your space. If you're putting your speakers in a big living room and you have a lot of room to pull them away from the walls, yeah, get towers. And Klipsch makes some good towers that are still affordable. You can get a pair of Klipsch towers with bass down to 35 hertz for, I think, $800 a pair now. Triangle makes some great under $1,000 speakers in both bookshelf and in floor standers. Oh, what else is out there? Kef, the Q series from Kef has some great options under $1,000. So those I would encourage you to look at, like ELAC, Triangle, Klipsch, Kef, and they have different sounds. But you can go, hopefully there's a store where you can go listen to some examples of these. And there's good amplifiers. I mean, Marantz is still doing really great things under $1,000. Yamaha has some great integrated amplifiers under $1,000. Cambridge Audio makes I forget which one it is. I think it's something AX model, AX35 maybe. They make it's like a 35, 40 watt per channel, all analog integrated amplifier. It's like $500. It's great.
Integrated amplifier meaning you don't need a preamp. Is that right?
Yes, and I don't know if these amps have phono stages or not, but in terms of like a preamplifier and a power amplifier, it's in one box, an integrated amplifier.
Right. Okay.
That's what you need to make the sound happen. And you can plug a CD player into that. If they have a phono stage in them, you can plug a turntable into it. Some of them now are starting to come with digital functions on them. Some of those are good and some of those aren't so good.
Like a streaming interface or something like that?
Or just like a DAC where you can plug in a streamer into it and it uses the DAC in the amplifier. Some of those are good and some of those are not, but it just depends on the model.
Okay. How do you feel about subs? Subwoofers?
Subs can be great. I use a sub in my system because subs are really good at is if you have a space that cannot take big speakers that naturally produce a full range sound. If you have a space that really it's only appropriate to use bookshelf speakers, you can get a lot of that low end, that integration, using a subwoofer, and the subwoofer won't have the same. The subwoofer will be less likely to overpower the room than the big box speaker will.
Yeah, I have a sub in my system, a Klipsch sub, and I just turn it way down, but it just gives it enough at the bottom end to just kind of take away to match the highs of the speakers that I have.
And I think the company that's really doing subs right, and the only subs I really recommend are this company called Rel.
Oh, okay. How do you spell that?
REL.
Okay.
And they make this a very popular combination. Have you ever heard of the Kef LS50s?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, they're a very. I mean, they retail new for like $1,500, but you can get them used for like under $1,000. That's a great speaker. If you have a small space, a Kef LS50 oftentimes is a great solution. But if you want
is that a bookshelf? That's a bookshelf.
It's a very small concentric driver bookshelf speaker. It's like a mini monitor.
I think Brian from Tokyo, he's got some.
Yes, he does. He has a pair of them on his bookshelf.
Okay, yeah, they're cool looking.
Yeah, if you can get a pair, especially if you can put them on stands and pull them out into the room, those speakers image like crazy. But one of the downsides of those speakers is they start rolling off around 70 hertz. So one of the the best combos right now that people are discovering is you buy those Kef LS50s and you get a Rel T5X, this little small subwoofer. It just has an 8-inch downfiring driver in it. It only goes to like 35 hertz or so, but it just fills out the sound of that speaker. It makes the space seem bigger than it is. And I think that sub is like a $600 sub. Okay. So for $2,000, you can have a full range speaker setup that's going to sound pretty damn
really good. Okay.
Yeah. That's a popular combination right now. If anyone wants to try pairing speakers with a sub, that's a combination I'd recommend.
Okay. Next question, tone control. How do you feel about not necessarily equalizers, but do you mess with your treble and bass at all?
I don't. And I've reviewed equipment that has tone controls. It's an okay feature. I mean, it's nice when the equipment has a bypass function, so where the signal isn't passing through those controls. If people like them, if you like listening to music with tone controls, that's great. I like to have a system that I'm satisfied with where I feel like I never need to employ tone controls. Like that's my goal, is I want to have a system that I build where it sounds good with all types of music, and I feel like I'm not missing anything that I have to adjust the system.
Yeah. I just have an older Harman Kardon receiver, and I find that with a lot of the like independent pressings and stuff, the older stuff that I have, the 74 stuff, it can be too crisp with not very much bass at all. So by turning up that bass just a little bit, it just seems to warm it up a little bit.
Yeah, if you enjoy that, that's great. I mean, for me, that would set off like my OCD, where it's like there's something wrong in my system. I need to fix this.
Yeah, interesting. That's cool.
But a lot of people use equipment. I mean, like we talk about audio cables. A lot of people use audio cables as a form of tone control. I mean, because like that's what audio. I think cables are important, and especially depending on which cables they are. Like, I think to me, I've noticed the most difference in playing with speaker cables and the power cable for the amplifier. Those are the two cables that I feel like make the biggest difference. Messing with power cables for my source components or messing with interconnect cables, I notice less. I don't notice as big of a difference. But when I swap out like a big pair of speaker cables or a big power cable for an amplifier, that's very noticeable to me. But a lot of people will use those cables because they do have different sonic signatures. I think like a really easy example is Nordist are known for making speaker cables that lean a little more on the detailed tipped up side. And on the other hand, Cardus cables generally are known for having a more smooth sonic signature. And so people will adjust their system a little bit by saying, oh, I'm looking for a little more smoothness in my system. Let me try these speaker cables. They'll use it as like a form of tone controls.
Interesting.
Because it's there. I'm not that person that will say, you use this cable, it's going to change your life. But if they can adjust the sound in your system a little bit, every physical thing in your system is gonna, I mean, if it carries the signal or interacts with the signal or the acoustics of the signal, it changes the sound slightly. How much it changes the sound is very dependent on where in your system you're talking about or what pieces of gear it is. But most things change the sound slightly.
Yeah. How do you feel about $5,000 speaker cables?
Depends on the context of the system. I run Kimber 12 TCs, and I bought them used. I'm a big proponent of, if you're going to buy cables, find them used because you can usually get them half off. I think I paid like $700 for them.
And does the length? Did you switch the length, or is that not an issue?
I think they're a 12-foot pair, maybe a 10-foot pair. Okay. But that was a speaker cable that retailed new for $1,500.
Okay.
In the context of my system, I think it fits. I would not want to buy a $5,000 set of speaker cables for my system because my system isn't expensive enough.
So are they big, thick? Are they like 8 gauge or 10 gauge cables?
Well, they're actually wrap strand. I can see if I show you. Actually, what's funny is here. I will try to get.
Well, I lost your audio. I can't hear you. Are you? I think you. No. No volume.
How about now?
There you go. Gotcha. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I moved things.
No, you're good.
They're not that thick.
Okay.
It's those light colored ones right there. But what there are is they're woven in a strand, in a complex weave strand, and Ray Kimber does that to help. He doesn't actually physically shield his cables. He does wrapping so that they naturally they reject interference. So they're shielded by geometry, which is kind of cool. I think these are pretty neutral sounding speaker cables, which is why I like reviewing with them. But if you can, I don't know if you can see it back there. My power cable for my amplifiers is a little overkill. It's a big giant thing.
Did you get that? Now you have a Hegel, is that right?
Yeah, let me see if I can.
And is that a set? So you got the power cable aside from just the?
Yeah, it's an Audio Quest cable. Let me see if I can show it. It's not really. Oh, here it's plugged into the. It's plugged into the integrated right now. Not seeing it. There we go. That big giant thing.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's an Audio Quest Thunder. And that's a serious power cable, and I bought it used. I bought it on AudioGown, but yeah, I use that for any power amplifier review. It's not hooked into my Hegel right now, but you can see my Hegel down there.
So it just uses the standard three-prong female end that you
Yeah,
can
it's a
plug
it's a
into
it's a it's a 15 amp power cable.
15 amp hour. Okay, that's cool. Right on. Well, hey, let's can we talk a little bit about what your some current, like your current vinyl addictions, or what are some, I know you're into Japanese, what's the category? Not, it's not just straight pop. You're muted again, bro. You back?
Okay, is my audio
There
back
you go.
now?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, this
What
is
are you
not this
looking
is not meant to be a mobile setup. So,
No, you're all good. What are you looking for in vinyl right now?
well, I don't know if I don't know if I talked with you about this. I started being interested in Japanese music probably really early, like seventh grade, eighth grade.
Oh,
I
really?
was discovering like Japanese, like a kind of it's called visual K, but it basically alternative rock or their kind of alternative rock over there in Japan, because some of that music was starting to get big in the United States around that time. Like one of the first bands I discovered, and it's kind of I feel like this band is an entry point for a lot of American music fans. Was this band called Duran Gray?
Okay.
This is one of my favorite albums by them. It's called Ouroboros, and it's they copied the cover from King Crimson. King Crimson's Lizard album cover.
Oh,
This is kind of a
okay.
tribute to that.
All right.
But that was a band that had kind of its roots in this weird, it's a Japanese style of music and aesthetic that had its roots in American hair metal and UK goth. And then Japan took that and kind of made its own thing out of it in the late 80s and early 90s, and that's what visual K is. It basically just means visual style. So I started discovering those bands when I was younger, and I just enjoyed the rabbit hole of discovering this entire music industry that is not necessarily kept hidden from the world. There's people, international fans of these types of music from Japan all over the world, but the difference is Japan is the second largest music market in the world. Outside of America, Japan is the biggest. But here's the difference. The United States exports its music all around the world. You can go to Germany or Japan or South Korea and buy a Rihanna CD or buy a Nirvana CD or buy all of that. Japan doesn't. Japan keeps it for itself. It doesn't export its music. There is very, very little Japanese music that receives American or European distribution.
JDM only. Yeah.
Yep. And it almost makes it like, oh, you think this is, no, I'm going to discover this stuff. It's harder.
Yeah.
But there's this whole, I'm discovering the rock music of the 2000s and the 90s when I was younger. I went on to discover like some of the new wave stuff in the 80s. And then, of course, now what's popular is city pop, which is totally different. It's not rock music.
That's the term I was looking for. Yeah.
City pop was Japan's popular music in the late 70s and the early 80s that was very, very influenced by both jazz, because Japan has a very, very strong connection to American jazz. It came over after World War II. The Japanese love jazz. So there's that strong jazz tradition in Japan. And also a love of the music that was coming out of America at that time in the 70s, which was AOR, which was soft rock, which was Seals and Crofts, Steely Dan, all that type of music that was big in the 70s. Japan was taking that, and like what they always do, they were doing their own thing with it. And it happened to go hand in hand with their kind of economic boom in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, back then, people thought Japan's economy was just going to take over the world. I mean, they were riding high. In the 80s, there was serious fears, and you can go back and like look at news coverage of this. Like they thought the GDP of Japan was going to surpass the United States. And then their economy crashed in like 91, and they haven't really recovered since.
Yeah.
But so the music industry had so much money, and they were funneling it all into these artists who were pop artists, but they were incredibly creative pop artists. You had artists like Tatsuro Yamashita, Yoshiki Karamatsu, that were associated with this new upwardly mobile young people living in the cities. And this was kind of their music. And it was big commercial, but I mean, some of this stuff, they had like 20-piece brass bands live playing on this album in the studio, paying for all these musicians with this expensive recording equipment. And they were even sending it, like the big productions, like if it was a big artist, they'd send it over to the United States to get mastered and cut. I have Japanese stuff from Japanese city pop artists that was cut by Bernie Grunman.
Really? Wow.
Multiple records. I mean, I just discovered this one record. This is actually almost less city pop than it is art pop or a little more experimental. But I just discovered this amazing album that I've been listening to lately. It's called Daydream. It's by this artist named Yoshitaka Minami. And if you look here, I love the cover on this. This is a textured cover. It's of the Guggenheim Museum.
Guggenheim, yeah.
In space or in the sky.
Yes.
But it's fully textured front and back. I mean, it's like the amount of money it must have cost to make this and put it on shelves. I bought this for $8. It's no one's heard of this. Do
you get that online, or you don't find that stuff in the wild, do you?
I got this on Discogs.
Okay.
Because I was going through, you know what it was? I was actually on Discogs browsing a list of Bernie Grunman cut albums that came from Japan.
Wow.
And I found this, and this was mixed by Elliot Shiner in LA, and it was cut by Bernie Grunman at Bernie Grunman Mastering.
Interesting.
Or actually, I think back then he was at A&M. I don't know. This sounds incredible. This is an incredible sounding album. There's so many gems like this in from the 70s and 80s in Japan.
Is Happy End considered, or is that before city pop?
No, they were part of the folk music boom. And I'd like to do a video about this. So the Japanese music went in waves. You had in the late 60s, the Beatles came to Japan. Remember in was it 67, I think, or 60? Yeah, 67. I think maybe it was 66. The Beatles came to Japan, and that strung off a whole genre of like Beatles, Monkees style bands that were big in the late 60s. That's called the group sounds era. Okay. You had all these bands in the like 68, 69 that were wearing the matching suits and doing the Beatles, Monkees, all that stuff. You had bands like the Spiders, the Tigers, the Tempters. It was all that bands like named like that.
Yeah.
And they were singing in English, because here's the thing. Back then, and I wrote an article in the Tracking Angle about this, that because I was talking about this band called Flower Traveling Band. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Mm-mm.
They were a big psychedelic rock band in the early 70s, but I did an article talking about the guy who founded that band and his kind of trajectory in he was like the godfather of rock and roll in Japan. And when I learned in reading about him is that, you know, back then in Japan, rock and roll was the cool import from America and from England. And you could only, like, if you lived near an American military base, you got the records earlier and you had better records, and you could go get Cream or Janis Joplin or Jimi Hendrix. And it was like, it was this really underground thing. But when it got big, this music, in order to seem authentic, they wouldn't sing in Japanese. They would sing in English. None of them spoke English. It sounds like garbled, like nothing. But they would sing in English because they were playing rock and roll, and to them, that's how you play authentic rock and roll. There was a reaction to that, though, and it was this new group of musicians that were coming up who wanted to make Japanese music in Japanese. That's what Happy End were a part of.
Okay.
It was the folk music boom. It was all these folk singers, acoustic guitar folk singers, and also folk rock bands. Happy End were the biggest one. There was also, I mean, there was a lot of artists like that coming up in like 1970 through 74. That was kind of the era of the folk rock boom in Japan. There's some great music from that era. I collect a lot of those records. Light in the Attic did a great comp of some of that music called If the Trees Could Shed Tears, I think is what it's called. And they did a really cool comp of some of that music that makes it a little more accessible than having to hunt down these records. That music's really cool. And then the city pop got big in the late 70s. It was disco. It was a lot of disco. Got big in the late 70s and the 80s. And then the reaction to that was the hair metal and the visual K. You had bands like X Japan that were like one of the biggest stadium rock bands in Japan coming around in the 80s and the 90s that looked like they were part of Def Leppard or something.
Do you know, Flaming Groove says 1234 Go Records in Oakland just announced a huge Japanese record drop today.
Yeah, and this stuff is becoming very popular to collect in America, especially the city pop. It's like 10 years ago, teenagers on Reddit rediscovered this music, and records that were $5 records in Japan 20 years ago are now $200 records.
Yeah, yeah. I'm the American music from the '90s, when the CDs were coming on, and they didn't press a lot of vinyl. Boy, I'm just seeing some of the prices of those records just going through the roof. It's just kind of crazy. I mean, I guess it's great. But it can be quite expensive. I guess we are getting a lot more reissues now, which is really cool too.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is in print now, which is great because it saves the originals for the people that are really care about the sound of the pressing and the sound of that first pressing. I'm glad some of that stuff is actually a good chunk of that stuff is in print now, even on really good sounding pressings. Like Tetsuro Yamashita's entire catalog has been reissued. Well, not entire catalog, but his pretty much his entire late 70s, early 80s catalog, which is most popular records.
Raji Vinyl asked me in Rachel's stream this morning to ask about Tetsuro Yamashita. Yamashita, is that right?
It's pronounced Yamashita.
Yamashita, okay.
It's spelled like Yamashita, but it's the correct Japanese pronunciation, as I've been told by a few people, is Yamashita.
And he's got something coming out later this year, I guess.
He's still making music
about it. Okay.
I mean, I listened to the album he put out. He put out a new album in like 2022-ish that was really good. I mean, I like his older records. He's very possessive of his music. He will not allow it on streaming services.
Oh, so I won't find it on Spotify.
Nope. And it used to be, when this music was getting popular on the internet, all the albums were up on YouTube. People would upload vinyl rips of them and everything. He's got a team of people now doing takedown orders.
Isn't that something? How do you feel about that?
It's his music. I mean, it's his art. He has that ability. Now, if it were a record company doing that, a lot of Japanese record labels will do that, and I have a problem with that. I think more. It's his music. He values the connection to either the physical music or the live show. Like he also orders the takedown of any footage from live shows of his.
Oh, wow.
And does it make it harder for fans that aren't in Japan to enjoy his music? Yeah. I kind of see it from his perspective. I don't have a strong opinion, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand it. I don't like it, but I understand it. You can still buy the CDs for $15 on Amazon.
Neil Young kept his music off Spotify for a long time, and I respected that. But
I had his Bono player. It was great.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a great little high-res music player. I still have it somewhere.
But I love, I'm in the truck, so I stream music a lot, especially music that I'm thinking about looking for the vinyl. And I've got a lot of Neil Young already, but it sure is nice to be able to listen to it in the truck, on Spotify.
It's not on, is it on Apple Music?
It might be. I just use Spotify, so it probably is.
I feel like Apple Music is the best middle ground, because at least you can stream CD quality on Apple Music, and it has a catalog that's, I think, of the same size as Spotify's, really.
So so I don't know. I haven't heard about sound quality difference between Spotify and Apple. Is Apple better?
Apple Music, everything in their library, if you have your settings set right, you can stream it at CD quality, so 1644.
Okay.
Which I think is, for most people, I think is fine. I use Apple Music in the car and with AirPods if I'm walking around somewhere.
So I have AirPods too, and I use. Do you would hear the difference between Spotify and Apple in your AirPods?
It depends how good my connection is, really. In AirPods, I don't know. In the car, I think the car I notice it. Especially, I've got a decent-ish system in my car. I mean, no car system is decent, really, because it's a glass box. But
yeah,
I have one that I actually it allows me to actually load a flash drive of files in the car, so I can load in flat files in my car, and that sounds the best. That hands down sounds the best. But I did notice a difference when I went from doing Spotify in the car to Apple Music. It sounded significantly different. I mean, the best is Qobuz. If you want to stream music on your system at home, I think Qobuz is hands down the best.
How do you spell that?
Qobuz.
And it's just an app that I can put on my phone?
Yeah, it's like Apple Music, or you can put it on your phone.
Interesting.
They have one of the smaller libraries, but they have everything. Everything is at least CD quality, and I would say 25% to a third of their library is high res, so 9624 files.
Huh. Man, I have so much to learn in that aspect of
Yeah,
the
I think
thing.
if you're streaming music on your home system or like on a home headphone setup or something like that, I
Mhm.
think Qobuz is definitely worth it. And they pay the artist the most anyway.
Oh, do they?
Yeah,
Interesting.
they have the highest payout of any of the streaming services.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. We're coming up almost to 2 hours here, so I want to. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, but
Yeah, no worries.
I I did this. I'm going to start this thing up again that I call Soup Can Chat. I sold my sushi restaurant a month before COVID hit in 2020, and just so happened it worked out great. Everybody knows the story about it or whatever. But then I rode my motorcycle for 2 years. Didn't have to go to work during the meat of the heart of
Yeah.
the pandemic, which was really good. And I rode it down the coast to San Diego and whatnot. And along the way, I would meet people and do. I did this thing kind of for my project. I have 4 daughters, and it was kind of a thing to um, to kind of show them how to meet strangers in a manner. Kind of, it's just kind of a funny thing for me. And what I did is I took a soup can with a string attached to it, and I put a Rode cordless mic in it. So I would sit and talk to people like this, and it was just like a 2 or 3 minute little thing. So I had these like 5 questions that I used, and did it for a handful of people down the coast and whatnot, but didn't do it anymore. But I'm going to kind of revive it for my YouTube channel here before too long, because I think I don't know. I think communication now is between people that are not our friends is important. So I'm gonna ask you 5 questions, and you can just give brief answers. Nothing super serious, but we'll just kind of wrap up that way. So, um, what is a name an album that is in your top 5 of all time? It doesn't have to be one, two, or three or four, but just something that, and if it's in your top 10 or whatever, that's fine. But just something that comes to mind that is just for a while, for years or whatever, has really um,
Yeah.
spoken to you emotionally, I guess.
This question, it's like there's so much great stuff out there. There's so many
You're gonna leave
albums that
out
have connected.
every other album
It's,
besides the one you
I mean,
mentioned.
like I grabbed a handful of stuff
Well,
for
you can
this
show
talk
more
because
than one.
I
You can
wondered
definitely,
if you were going to ask me about stuff that was really influential to me growing up. I mean, I
yes.
showed
So
that Sound of That Sound of Animals fighting record. It's really, really meaningful to me.
make
Another,
it
I would
more
say,
than one. That's no problem.
a really, really emotional record for me that is just, you know how there's albums that have a feeling attached to them, and you can like pinpoint a time in your life when
It's
you
the
were listening to
soundtrack
this
to our
album.
lives. There's no doubt about it.
A really, really big album for me for that is this album by a Texas band called Mineral. And it's this album, End Serenading. I don't know if you ever heard of this.
No, I'm gonna write that. It's called Mineral.
Yeah, this is I think probably the best emo record ever made.
Really?
It's so beautiful. Every song is so, just makes you feel something.
What year did it come
Whether
out?
it's, this came out I think in 98.
Okay.
Yeah, was this 98? I don't know if it says, but they were from Austin, and this album actually came out after they broke up. It's their second album.
Okay.
This is, man, if you were to like that like heavy summer like young nostalgia that you feel at like the tinge of a friendship that died out, or a relationship that you think about from the past, or a point in your life that you can go back to, this album makes you feel that.
Okay.
So this was a very powerful album for me, discovering it, and I still come back to it from time to time. That was a really important album for me. I mean, I didn't really discover it until like I want to say I think I learned about it when I was like 18, 19.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's let's see. I mean, the album I showed, the Darren Gray stuff was really important to me. This album, I listened to this record so much. This is A Natural Death by the band Horse the Band.
Okay.
This was an important band for me. Well, first of all, this is a band that messed with so many different genres of music and fused them seamlessly in not a corny way, in a very intentional way. And they have a lot of themes in their music about what it's like to be an artist, And like, what is the point of art? Like, what are we doing for ourselves and for other people when we make art? Some of it's a little bit nihilistic, but it's also, there's also some positive affirmations of like humanness in this music. And it's so funny because they got famous for being a band that was dubbed Nintendo Core. And the reason they got dubbed with that label is because instead of a second guitarist, they have a synthesizer. They have a synth player who generally leans towards the more 8-bit kind of sounds, but there's so much more than that. It's such a, because I mean, like, if you think about it, a lot of video game music, especially from the 80s and 90s, is actually very sophisticated music. Like, you have whole like orchestras now that tour on video game music.
Right.
So introducing that kind of sonic landscape into heavy music, they did so well, and it's not corny.
To listen to that. Okay.
And it's, I mean, I think their best album is actually the one that came out after this, called Desperate Living, which is not on vinyl, unfortunately. But this is their second to last album, A Natural Death, which is this is a painting. They commissioned a painting.
That's pretty
cool. This album cover of them getting killed by Indians.
Wow. Very cool. Where are they from?
They're from Los Angeles.
Okay.
And one of the most powerful things they did is right before they broke up, they said, screw it. And they fired their record label, self-booked and self-funded a 40-country world tour on credit card debt.
Wow. Starting
in Los Angeles, going to New Zealand, Australia, Japan, China. They played in China in 2008. Is a hardcore band. And then to like Israel, Turkey, up through Eastern Europe. They were the first American heavy band to play in Belarus since Megadeth in the 90s.
Wow.
All the way through Europe to England and then back to New York City. And they made a 10-hour documentary about it called...
I was just going to ask, is it documented?
I think you can watch... Now, at this point, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube.
Really? Okay, I'm going to have to dig into Horse the Band.
And it's just like living out of a van for 3 months, going to all these countries, meeting all these, putting yourself in these crazy situations. The singer in Russia, like broke his shoulder and was touring on a broken shoulder for like the rest of the tour and just medicating with alcohol. Wow. It's a really like interesting, visceral look at like what it is like to throw your entire being into something,
to your
like
art,
striving to put on this tour, to be a full-time band.
Yeah.
And just like, you know, still being in relative poverty and not having commercial success and just rejecting all of that and just putting your whole being into art. And even if you fail, it's like you fail doing something that's passionate and means something.
That's fantastic.
It's kind of a heavy watch. It's a good, like, if you're ever like sick with the flu and you're in bed and you want to sit and watch something for 10 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that this is a band and an album that means a lot to me.
That's cool. Very, very not mainstream, which I appreciate. Okay. What's a meal you never get tired of?
What's a what?
A meal that you never get tired of. Something that you could have every week.
Tired of. I don't know. I really like steak. That's a really boring answer. I'm sure I get tired of steak.
No. I think that'd probably be mine too. Yeah. Do you have a particular cut that you like?
It's hard to get tired of steak because it's one of those things you can't afford to have it every day.
Indeed. That's exactly right. In fact, I find myself, I like it so much that I get a cheaper cut and try and experiment with ways to make it better and better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'll do that with flank steak. Flank steak is also hanger steak. Hanger steak can be really good.
Oh, okay.
For a cheaper cut that's still tender.
Are you just a salt and pepper guy, or do you sauce it up or marinate?
I like doing a little bit of garlic too.
Okay.
And at different cuts, I'll do different ways. Like, I mean, if I'm going to like a steakhouse where they really know how to do it, of course you get ribeye.
Yeah.
Ribeye's hard to cook really well at home. It's nerve-wracking.
It can be because you don't want to spoil it.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to cook it too long, and you don't want it to be too red in the middle, I guess.
But actually what I've been doing lately, if I want to have like a really nice steak meal, is I go to Costco and get Costco filet mignon are pretty good and pretty relatively affordable-ish. Mm-hmm. I'll do a filet mignon and I'll sear it in the pan and then finish it in the oven because it's a thicker piece of meat.
Do you broil it in the oven? or do you just
No,
bake
I'll do bake, but after
Okay.
in cast iron, so after the pan's already hot, so it's still searing
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And I'll do salt, pepper, rub, and then spoon garlic butter over it.
Yeah.
And then I'll do like a sour cream I'll do a sauce that's like a sour cream cognac reduction with mushroom,
Oh, fantastic.
and I'll put that over it.
What would
Sorry,
you what would be your like a veg of choice? I really like asparagus.
asparagus or green beans,
Green beans. Okay.
and then of course you got to have potatoes.
Yeah. Do you like mashed? Do you like baked?
No,
Scallop?
I do crispy small chunk crispy baked potatoes,
What
like
is it?
baked
Is that
cut it
country
into
style?
wedges.
Like a country style kind of, or
Like you cut the potato into like quarter size chunks, or maybe even
okay.
bigger, maybe like half dollar size chunks,
Hmm.
and do salt, pepper, garlic, maybe even like truffle salt, and baste it in olive oil and do it in the oven at 425.
Sounds awesome. Okay. What does our country need right now? Kind of heavier question.
Oh God. Uh what does our country need? I
It
think
doesn't have to be the thing, but
our
something.
country probably needs less reliance on social media. And I say this as I'm sitting here on a social media platform talking to people on social media.
No, but this isn't TikTok, right? This is a long.
No, but it's a problem across platforms, because what social media does is it feeds you into, well, social media is very good for audience capture, and it feeds you into groups where you're fed essentially what you want to hear, what you want to see, and you're sectioned off with people that enforce what I would say is we now have all these different subgroups where rigorous adherence to the group ideology is very, very heavily enforced. Whether you are liberal, leftist, right, or like heavy Trump supporter, all of these groups have now sectioned themselves off into a social environment where basically you can tell them, if you're going to have one opinion, you have to have these other 6 opinions. Indeed. If you find yourself filtering into a group where you have a certain opinion about, like, let's say, tax policy, well, now all of a sudden you're filtered into a group that's going to assign you all these different other opinions that don't necessarily have anything to do with that.
If you know somebody's stance on abortion, you also know their stance on immigration in a lot of ways, stuff like that. You're siloed in. Yeah.
So I think we need more of that. I think we need more abundant housing.
Yeah.
I think we haven't really built anything in this country in like 30 years. And we have a housing shortage because of it, because everyone's decided that their city is perfect the way it is.
Yeah.
And we don't have cities now that look like Shanghai or that look like Tokyo. We have cities that look like great American cities from 50 years ago. Indeed. I think that's a problem, because we are still economic leaders of the world. We still have a culture that is exported all over the world. Everyone loves American culture. Everyone loves American innovation, American science, American. We do so much right in this country, but we can't seem to make our economic centers on par with the rest of the world. San Francisco. This problem in Denver. It's a problem in Houston. Well, Houston, less of a problem, where we haven't built anything to keep up with that amazing innovation, and that makes me sad. San Francisco should look like Shanghai,
right? Yeah,
and that's not because the Chinese do anything better than us, except in one thing, and it's building great cities that people can live in. Where they build enough housing where people can afford rent that isn't going up and going up and going up because there's not enough housing. I mean, there's not enough supply.
Right.
Phoenix. I lived in Phoenix. Phoenix has a lot of cool things. Phoenix, over COVID, Phoenix added 600,000 new jobs a year, and they were building like 30,000 new units of housing a year. That's just math.
Yeah.
In Phoenix is better than a lot of places where they're building like 5,000 new units of housing a year, when they're adding 500,000 new jobs a year. Eventually, we're starting to hit a head on that. And I think people are starting to realize that's a problem, and it's a bipartisan problem. It's not a problem that is inherent to a political ideology, but it's something I think culturally we're grappling with right now.
Yeah. Okay. What do you want people who disagree with you to understand about you?
I like to think I strive for, not necessarily, because no one's perfect and we don't always have the things we strive for, but I like to think I strive for a pretty open epistemology, where if you can show me a good argument as to why I'm mistaken about something or why a different approach is a better approach, I'd like to think that I'm open to revising my opinion. And I have revised my opinion over the years on many things. And I think that's objectivity is a loaded term in many ways, but the idea of objectivity and an open approach to epistemology, to changing your mind, is something no one is perfect at. It's not this thing that someone is, but I think it's an idea we can strive for.
Yeah. Would you say that being able to falsify your own positions is a tool in your belt?
Yes, I try to do that a lot, and it's actually a tool I've used to change my opinion on a few number of topics.
I think it's very useful. Very useful.
It is. It's something you can use to examine new ideas, but also to examine kind of built-in beliefs that you may have. Like I think I'd like to think I can justify most of the beliefs that I have, but if I can't, tell me, because I'd like to look at that, because
I want to actively look for ways that I'm wrong. Because then you're learning, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, last question. Where do you want to visit?
Oh, a lot of places. There's a lot.
Name a few. That would be, not just something that would be at the top of your list for places.
I'd like to go see Hong Kong. It's a really fascinating city, and it's a city that's changing a lot, and I'd like to see it before it changes to be too much like China, because in many ways Hong Kong has forever been kind of its own thing. Yeah. And I'd like to see it before it just becomes another big Chinese city. I'd love to see Japan. There's a lot of interesting stuff about Japan that I like. A lot of stuff I don't like, but a lot of stuff I do like. That's
a big one for me.
I'd love to explore some of the older historic European cities. I mean, I've been to Germany and I've been to Italy. I hear Budapest is awesome. It's this amazing historic cultural city that I'd love to see. I'd love to see parts of Poland, very historic cities as well. Norway would be cool.
Lots of good things about Prague.
Yeah, Prague is a big one. I feel like Prague is like one of those cities that a lot of people hit, though.
It does seem to be very popular amongst the cool people. Yeah. Well,
I'd love to go to, sorry, I'll add one more city. I'd love to go to Buenos Aires.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that would be great. My daughter went down there a couple of years ago and absolutely loved it. It's that would be fun. Anyway, Michael, thank you for spending 2 hours with us. I learned so much, and I really appreciate you giving your Sunday lunchtime so that we can do this.
Of course.
You can find your channel at PoetryOnPlastic.
Yep, PoetryOnPlastic. I don't do nearly enough videos, but
no, well, you're a busy guy. And what's the publication you write for again? Sound?
So I write for a website called The Tracking Angle. It's www.trackingangle.com. And then I also you will find me on the YouTube channel of the magazine The Absolute Sound. You can just look up on YouTube Absolute Sound, and you will find my reviews along with the reviews of my colleagues on there. And that's pretty much it. And you'll also find me if the United States Air Force Academy band is ever coming to your city. If you live in New England, in about 2 weeks we'll be up there. So check our website.
Any West Coast stuff at all?
Or not planned right now.
Okay. Did they ever come to the Pacific Northwest?
So our band is interesting because on the one hand, we have a region that is our responsibility, which is kind of the Rocky Mountain Central Mountain Time region. But then we also do recruiting for the Academy. And so typically when we go outside that region, it's specifically for recruiting for the Air Force Academy. So this tour we're doing in the Northeast is for the Air Force Academy, because there is an Air Force band at Travis Air Force Base in California.
Oh, okay.
That does a lot of the touring on the West Coast. So if you see an Air Force band coming to you, it's probably going to be Band of the Golden West from Travis.
Oh, okay. Right on. All right. Well, fantastic, man. Have a great Sunday afternoon, and we'll talk to you all
Thank you.
next Sunday with another guest. Take care, guys.
See you, everyone.